The year is 2024. The place is a quiet restaurant in Boston. A restaurant where the tables are far enough apart for secrets, and the wine list is heavier than the menu. A food writer named Adrian Vale sits alone near the back wall. For 32 years, Adrian has been paid to notice what other people miss. He has tasted $400 tasting menus, truffles shaved like snow, sauces reduced until they shine like glass. He is tired of being impressed. Then the cheese arrives. Not a board full of little museum pieces. Just one wedge on a warm gray plate. The rind is cloth-bound, almost black at the edges. The paste inside is the color of late October sunlight. The server says this is the North Cellar Reserve. It comes from one farm in Vermont. We only receive one wheel every month. Adrian cuts a narrow piece with the tip of his knife. He expects richness. He expects salt. He expects the usual little performance of rarity. Instead, he stops chewing. There is fresh cream in it, yes. But underneath that, there is wet hay. There is apple wood. There is the mineral taste of cold pasture after rain. It does not taste like a product. It tastes like a place that refused to disappear. He looks up at the server. "Can I see the wheel?" A few minutes later, she returns carrying the whole cloth-bound wheel on both hands. On the side of the rind, pressed deep into the fabric and wax, are 3 words: Morrow Vale Farm. Adrian pulls out his phone. First he finds awards, regional medals. A small feature in a food magazine calling the cheese one of the finest Farmstead wheels in New England. Then he searches deeper. Morrow Vale Farm, 1991. An old digitized dairy bulletin appears from a county archive. The headline is dry enough to hide a funeral. Pine County Dairy Pool consolidates collection routes. Below it is a list of farms removed from pickup service. Adrian scrolls past names that look like they belonged on mailboxes, not spreadsheets. Bennett, Corliss, Hadley, and then he sees it. Morrow Vale Farm, volume below economic threshold. He looks back at the wheel on the table. The same name that had once been typed onto a list of farms too small to collect was now stamped into a cheese people waited months to taste. This is not a story about cheese. It is a story about what happens when a system mistakes small for worthless. And it begins on a raw April morning in 1991, when Clara Morrow watched a clean blue sedan turn into her gravel driveway. Clara was 37 years old. Her father had died that winter, leaving behind a white farmhouse with a sagging porch, a barn that needed a roof, 46 Jersey cows, and a bank note that seemed to breathe under the kitchen table. She had grown up on Morrow Vale Farm, left once, came back with a 12-year-old son named Eli, and no patience for anyone who called dairy work simple. She knew the cows by the sound of their hooves on the concrete. She knew which pasture came in sweet after a hard frost. She knew how the cream line rose in the glass jars when the grass was right. What she did not know was how to survive when the truck stopped coming. Every other morning, the Pine County tanker rolled down the lane, took her milk, tested it, pumped it, and turned it into a check. The check was never large, but it was the thin bridge between the barn and the bank. That morning, the tanker did not come. The sedan did. Paul Alden stepped out wearing a wool coat and carrying a clipboard in a plastic sleeve. Paul was the collection manager for Pine County Dairy Pool. He was not cruel. That almost made it worse. He knew Clara's father. He had eaten at her kitchen table. He had brought casseroles after the funeral. He stood by the porch steps and looked at the mud before he looked at Clara. "Clara," he said, "we have to talk about your route." She heard the whole conversation inside those 8 words. Pine County had merged with a larger processor across the state line. Fuel was up. Labor was up. Small stops were being reviewed. That was the word Paul used. Reviewed. He opened the plastic sleeve and showed her the sheet. There were columns for gallons, miles, driver minutes, lab cost, tank time. Morrow Vale was not a farm on that page. It was a drag on a route. Paul tapped the line with his finger. "Your milk is excellent. Nobody is saying otherwise. But the volume is too low. The turn into your lane costs more than the pickup brings back. The turn into your lane." Clara looked past him toward the barn. A cow bawled from inside, impatient for feed. The sound was ordinary, and that made the moment more brutal. The world did not pause when it was ending. Paul kept talking gently. "The board authorized me to make an offer on your herd. It would clear most of the note, give you breathing room. A clean transition." Transition sounded like a word made by people who had never buried their hands in winter bedding. It meant sell the cows, empty the barn, watch the pasture grow useless, let the Morrow name become a road sign people drove past. Clara took the sheet from him and read it again. She did not understand every formula. She understood the result. A place could be alive for 80 years, and then a new spreadsheet could decide it was a waste of fuel. She handed the paper back. "My milk isn't the problem, Paul." He nodded with pity. "No, it's good milk. Best Jersey cream on this side of the ridge. But good isn't enough anymore." The market changed. He believed he was giving her reality. Clara heard something else. He was saying the system could not carry her value, so her value must not exist. After he left, the lane stayed marked with 2 wet tire tracks. Clara stood in the yard until the wind cut through her coat. Then she went into the barn and put her forehead against the warm neck of a cow named June. For the first time in her life, she had milk with nowhere to go. That evening, her Aunt Miriam came by with a pot of soup. Miriam was 79, narrow as a fence post, with hands that looked carved from walnut. She had helped Clara's grandmother make butter in the old washroom before stainless steel took over everything. Clara told her what Paul had said. Miriam listened without interrupting. Then she looked toward the dark window, where the reflection of the kitchen sat over the black shape of the pasture. They own the tanker, Miriam said. They own the scale. They own the place where your milk disappears into everyone else's. She turned back to Clara. But they don't own the cows. They don't own the grass. They don't own the spring water under this hill. And they don't own your hands. Clara said nothing. Miriam pushed the soup bowl closer. That milk has been feeding this family since before Paul Alden had a clipboard. If their truck is too big to see it, make something smaller. Something they can't pour into a tank. It was not a plan. It was a door. Late that night, after Eli fell asleep on the couch with his math book open, Clara climbed to the attic. In a cedar trunk beneath quilts and old seed catalogs, she found her grandmother's notebooks. Most pages were practical. Planting dates, calving records, weather notes. But near the back was a section written in a careful hand. Cellar cheese, not cheddar, not something for a fair. A farm cheese made to preserve spring milk through the hard months. Warm the milk until it feels like blood. Wait until the curd holds against the knife. Salt with a steady hand. Press under stone. Turn each day. Do not hurry what is alive. Clara read the page until the words blurred. The next morning, she milked as usual, but instead of sending everything into the bulk tank, she filled 2 steel pails and carried them to the farmhouse. Milk is not light when it has stopped being someone else's commodity. Her arms burned by the time she reached the kitchen. She heated it in the largest pot she owned. She borrowed rennet from a neighbor who still made junket for church suppers. She cut the curd too early. She salted too late. She pressed it under a stack of cast-iron pans because she had nothing better. The first wheel smelled wrong by the 3rd day. The second cracked down the middle. The third grew mold that looked like blue fur on a dead animal. Eli asked if they were supposed to look like that. Clara said, "Not yet." She began studying with the desperation of someone whose future had become a recipe. She drove 40 minutes to the library and photocopied every page she could find on Farmstead cheese. She called a retired cheesemaker in Quebec, whose number she found in an old dairy magazine. He answered because he thought she was a salesman. He stayed on the phone because he heard something in her voice. He told her to watch the acidity, to feel the curd between her fingers, to stop trusting clocks more than texture. "You are not making cheese from milk," he said. "You are making cheese from your farm. Learn what your farm is saying." Clara cleaned the old apple cellar under the north side of the house. The walls were fieldstone. The floor stayed cool even in July. She set pans of water in the corners for humidity and hung a thermometer from a nail. She scrubbed shelves until her knuckles split. By the 5th week, the cellar smelled less like dirt and more like possibility. By the 9th week, she had 12 uneven wheels aging in the dark. They were ugly, too small, too rough. The rinds were patched like old coats. But when she cut one open, the paste glowed pale gold. She tasted it, standing at the cellar stairs. It was not perfect. The salt was uneven. The texture was too firm near the rind. But behind the mistakes, there it was, the hill. The spring grass, the Jersey cream. The thing Pine County had called too small to collect, had become too specific to replace. Clara wrapped the wheel in cloth and drove to a restaurant in Montpelier called the Mill House. The chef, Jonah Mercer, had a reputation for buying from farmers before it was fashionable. He was washing carrots when Clara knocked at the back door. She held out the wheel. "I made this from my own milk." Jonah wiped his hands on his apron and looked at her like every chef looks at a stranger carrying a risk. He cut a piece with a paring knife. He chewed once, then again. His face changed before he spoke. "How much can you bring me?" Clara almost laughed. "This is the only good one. Then bring me the next good one." He asked what it was called. Clara thought of the cellar, the cold north wall, the place under the house where her milk had learned to stay alive. "North Cellar," she said. Jonah wrote it on the chalkboard that night. North Cellar Farm Cheese, Morrow Vale Farm. For the first time since the route ended, Clara's name did not sit on a cancellation list. It sat on a menu. The first year did not look like success. It looked like exhaustion. She milked before dawn, made cheese after breakfast, cleaned equipment until her back seized, did barn chores, delivered to Jonah on Fridays, and fell asleep at the kitchen table while Eli finished homework beside her. In 1992, she was selling 6 wheels a week to the Mill House and 2 more to a country inn over the ridge. She bought a real cheese press with cash wrapped in a rubber band. In 1994, 3 restaurants were calling every month, asking if she had anything aged longer. She converted the rest of the apple cellar and put a lock on the door because 1 wheel now represented weeks of feed. In 1996, Eli learned to turn the wheels after school. He did not always want to. He was 16. He wanted a car. He wanted a life that did not smell like brine and bedding. But he also saw the checks on the kitchen table getting larger than the old milk checks had ever been. Then came 1999, 8 years after Paul Alden had stood in her yard with the route sheet. Clara entered North Cellar Reserve in the state dairy competition. She did it quietly. No speech, no revenge plan. Just 1 wheel wrapped in brown paper and driven to the fairgrounds in the back of her pickup. The judging was blind. The aged Farmstead category included cheeses from large creameries, university programs, and Pine County Dairy Pool's new branded line. The head judge that year was Paul Alden. Clara saw him from across the hall and almost carried her wheel back to the truck. But she stayed. Paul did not know which cheese was hers. He moved down the table with a knife and a pencil. He tasted. He wrote. He tasted again. When he reached entry number 31, he paused. He took another piece. Then he did something Clara had seen chefs do, only when food reached past opinion into memory. He closed his eyes. That afternoon, the blue ribbon went to Morrow Vale Farm. When Clara walked up, Paul's face went still. He read the card. Then he looked at her. Recognition arrived first, then shame. He pinned the ribbon to the display card and shook her hand. "Clara," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "You always had extraordinary milk." She wanted the sentence to feel like victory. It did not. It felt like proof had finally reached someone too late. There is a lonely kind of vindication that comes when a person who pitied you discovers they were measuring the wrong thing. You do not become taller. They simply stop seeing you as small. By the early 2000s, the dairy world was getting louder and harder. Farms expanded or vanished. Milk prices rose and collapsed. Trucks drove past empty barns. Every meeting used the same words: scale, efficiency, consolidation. Clara listened to those words and built in the opposite direction. She did not try to become large. She became precise. She capped the herd at 62 cows, because that was what the pasture could feed without losing itself. She refused to buy cheap outside feed when the grass ran thin. She sold out every year, instead of diluting the thing people were buying. Distributors called from New York and Chicago. They wanted volume. They wanted guarantees. One offered a contract that would have paid off the bank twice over if she agreed to double the herd and build a larger creamery. Eli was 21 by then. He read the offer at the kitchen table. "That's real money," he said. Clara nodded. "It is, so why not?" She walked him to the aging cellar and put a young wheel in his hands. "What do you smell?" He shrugged. "Milk. Salt. Now this one." She handed him a wheel aged 18 months. He smelled it and paused. "Apples," he said. "Stone. Grass." Clara took it back. "That's what they're paying for. Not cheese. Not my name. This place. If we grow past the place, we lose the thing that made the name worth anything." Eli did leave after that. He went to college for agricultural business, worked for a distributor in New York, learned websites, shipping, packaging, taxes, and all the parts of survival Clara hated. Then, in 2011, he came home. Not because he failed out there, because he finally understood what she had built here. He redesigned the labels, but kept the stamp. He built a direct order list with a waiting period. He wrote the story honestly, not as tragedy, as proof. The route ended. The cellar began. Customers began buying the cheese months before it existed. By 2016, North Cellar Reserve was in restaurants from Boston to Washington. But Morrow Vale still had one herd, one cellar, one hill, and one rule. If the land could not carry it, the business could not either. Then, in the summer of 2019, another vehicle turned into Clara's driveway. It was not Paul's sedan. It was a pickup with the Pine County Dairy Pool logo on the door. A woman in her early 30s got out. Her name was Rachel Alden, Paul's daughter. She had taken over a co-op that was no longer strong enough to pretend it did not need the farms it had once discarded. Members were leaving. Prices were brutal. The pooled milk model was bleeding money. Rachel found Clara in the packing room, tying cloth around a row of wheels with Eli and 2 employees beside her. "Mrs. Morrow," she said, "I'm here because my father told me I should come." Clara looked at her for a long moment. Rachel swallowed. "He said Pine County made a mistake in 1991. The room went quiet. There are apologies that arrive so late, they no longer know where to land. Rachel continued. "We want to start a Farmstead line. Branded cheeses from member farms, real origin, real value. We know how to collect milk. We don't know how to make this." She gestured toward the wheels. "We'd like to hire you as our master cheesemaker. Consulting, training, whatever fee you name. Help us rebuild the co-op around what you proved." Clara wiped her hands on a towel. Then she led Rachel down to the north cellar. The air below was cool and mineral. Wheels rested on wooden boards in long rows. Some were young and pale. Some were dark with age, their cloth stained by years of turning. On every rind was the same stamp, Morrow Vale Farm. Clara cut a sliver from a 3-year wheel and handed it to Rachel. Rachel tasted it. Her eyes filled before she could hide it. Clara waited. Then she said, "Your father looked at my farm and saw a root problem. He was not evil. He was loyal to the tool in his hand. The tool was a spreadsheet, so that is all he could see." Rachel looked down. "I know." "No," Clara said gently. "You know the story. I live the cost." The seller seemed to hold the sentence. Rachel nodded. Clara continued. "I will not become Pine County's master cheesemaker." Rachel's face fell. "But I will teach your farmers." She looked at the rows of wheels. Not the brand, not the board, the farmers. Anyone who wants to learn how to turn their own milk into something their own land can sign. They can come here. I'll show them what I know. Rachel stared at her. "You'd do that after what happened?" Clara smiled then, but not softly. "I'm doing it because of what happened. That winter, 9 farm families came to Morrow Vale. They arrived tired, skeptical, and half embarrassed to admit they did not know how to make value outside the tanker. Clara showed them the equipment. Then she showed them her mistakes. The cracked wheels, the notes from failed batches, the old thermometer, the first pail, dented at the rim, that had carried milk to her kitchen when the truck stopped coming. She taught them cultures and acidity. She taught them sanitation and pricing. But more than that, she taught them to taste their own pasture as evidence. One farm made a sheep's milk wheel with a nutty rind. One made a soft cheese from spring milk and herbs. One family, the Perizes, made a raw milk queso that sold out at farmers' markets by noon. Within 4 years, 5 farms had built small creameries. They created a cheese trail through the county. Tourists came on weekends. Restaurants started printing farm names on menus. Empty barns found new work. A few sons and daughters who had sworn they would never come home came home with plans. Pine County never became the empire Rachel imagined, but the farms became harder to erase. Clara is 70 now. She does less lifting. Eli runs the orders. A young cheesemaker named Maya manages the cellar. The herd is still small enough that the cows have names. June is gone, but her line is still there in a heifer with a white star on her forehead. In the farmhouse living room above the mantel, there is no framed newspaper cover. There is a dented steel pail. The first one. Children in the family ask about it, and Clara tells them the plain version. The truck stopped. The milk stayed. So she learned how to make the farm visible. Adrian's article in Boston, later called North Cellar Reserve, a cheese that remembers the ground beneath it. That was close. But the better truth is this. A system looked at Clara Morrow and decided her farm was too small for the root. So she made something the root could not measure. She made time edible. She made a name heavy enough to stamp into cloth and rind. And every wheel that leaves that cellar carries the same quiet answer. Small is not the same as worthless. Sometimes small is simply where value is still concentrated enough to taste.